549 drones. Early this morning, Russia carried out a new massive air attack across the entire Ukrainian territory. The 549 strikes were met with virtually no response from Ukraine's almost non-existent air defenses. The targets were mainly Ukraine's energy and transportation infrastructure. Without electricity, fuel, or heating, a devastating winter begins in Ukraine. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Berlin, Germany, we begin broadcast number 274 of Demolishing Political Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us as always, and please remember to help us out with a thumbs up, with your comments, with your subscription, and of course through our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. TikTok too, by the way. From Madrid, Spain, on the other side of the screen and the other side of the European continent, we're joined by Fernando Moragón. Hello, Fernando. How are things over there?
Nos acompaña Fernando Moragón. Hola, Fernando. ¿Qué tal todo por ahí?
Bien, bien. Todo marcha según lo planeado.
Good, good. Everything is going according to plan. The continent keeps sinking faster and faster. So there's no problem, because this can't be fixed anymore. I'm one of those who believe it can't be fixed. But anyway, that said, everything else is fine. Pleasant temperature, 26 degrees. Well, what more could you ask for? Because you can't really ask for much more. I mean, you're not going to ask for prosperity. No, we're already living in a fantasy. So, what are you going to ask for? Peace? Ask for peace? Please, that's naive. What else could you ask for? I don't know, really. Industrialization, what nonsense. I mean, no. We're heading toward a crisis that on top of everything is going to be quite entertaining when it finally blows up, which could happen in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I don't know. But no, it won't go beyond the next decade. The moment it blows up, it's going to be spectacular, because it'll be, how should I put it, a mix of everything, right? Like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but a modern version. Hunger, well, almost non-existent wages, crisis everywhere, ecological crisis, crisis of everything. It's going to be something extraordinary. And it's not that I'm trying to sound like some doomsayer or amateur prophet, but the data are becoming more and more obvious, especially when you read the people who more or less know about this. Everyone already agrees that these crazy Europeans are leading us to war. It's almost unanimous now. And Orban said it the other day, right? He's repeated it, the other day. This week, at the conference, at the European Union meeting in Copenhagen with the EU leaders, Orban, who has been clashing, had a face-off last week, and this one with Donald Tusk, or Tusk, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. This Polish man, they've had a face-off because Tusk has said several times that we are at war with the Russians, that there's no point in sitting down for nonsense. And this man said to him, "Are we all at war? Because I'm not." And they've had some pretty heated exchanges, with Viktor Orban saying they're all crazy and explaining that what was being discussed there was the war. In other words, how we wage war against the Russians, not how we look for solutions, or how we improve the well-being of the European population, how we raise social security, or how we fight unemployment. No, that's what they were talking about there.
Indeed. And to begin the analysis of the global geopolitical situation, and particularly the Eurasian geopolitical situation, Fernando will first present the situation in Ukraine. Later, we'll also analyze the situation in Georgia, Gaza, and other places. But how about we start with the massive attack carried out by Russia in the early hours of yesterday across the entire Ukrainian territory. Here we have the usual infographic from the Ukrainian Air Force, reporting 549 attacks, 496 with drones, 9 with Caliber missiles, 42 with Kh-101 missiles, and 2 with Kinzhal missiles. This is the image showing the flight paths, coming from all directions, from the south, from the north, and from the east, across the entire front line. The attacks, and notably, this time not concentrated in a single point, but in western Ukraine, the main target area, as well as in the north, the south, and even in
pero también en el norte, en el sur e incluso en el este.
Bueno, hay que decir, esto es importante.
Well, it must be said, and this is important, that the map he presented, with all those colors, shows that underneath them there's a country called Ukraine. Otherwise, you wouldn't see it. I mean, with so many drones, down there was Ukraine. And indeed, in the capital, let's say, of historical Ukrainian ultranationalism, Lviv, there have been heavy and very heavy attacks. Among other things, NATO had just opened, according to what I've read a week ago, a logistics center, and now they'll have to build a new one because the Russians destroyed it. Well, in Lviv, indeed.
drone attacks, missile attacks, something for everyone. Pay attention to the number of attacks. This one, by the way, took place in the Sparrow Industrial Park, a very, very important industrial park. To this day, firefighters are still working on
Let's see, I think we've mentioned this before, but that sound you hear in the background when the Geran's attack is done on purpose. It's kind of copied from the famous Stukas of World War II, which had a siren that made a similar noise. And they do this to create the same effect of, let's say, terror, for lack of a better word.
These images are from today, from the industrial park called once again Sparrow, completely destroyed with multiple impacts. This is in Lviv, at the plant indeed. According to this report, there were 6 Gerans, but not only there, also in several other places. Well, we already presented this, we already showed these images, and on the outskirts of Lviv, there were also attacks on the gas infrastructure in Opar. There are no images of this, apparently only sound, but also a massive attack on the compressor in this area, on the gas turbines, and on this gas storage facility as well. By the way, well, all of this is within a certain context, Fernando. These are the attacks in the West, all of this happening in a context where reports began to appear on pro-Ukrainian Telegram channels about changes in the trajectories of Iskander missiles, as well as other Russian missiles, and about the fact that this modernization, this upgrade of Russian missiles, is practically rendering the Patriot air defenses useless. Which means that this was even reported by pro-Ukrainian channels specializing in military issues. So, either the interception figures published by the Ukrainian Air Force basically don't reflect reality and are lies, showing interception rates above 95%. And the pro-Ukrainian Twitter users and bloggers are spreading this rumor solely to obtain more defenses. Or, on the contrary, this is the reality. The Patriots are no longer responding in any way to Russian attacks. And the interception figures presented by the Ukrainian Air Force are actually fabricated, completely made up. One of the two, Fernando.
Let's see. To put it mildly, let's just say that Ukrainian figures tend to be extraordinarily exaggerated, to put it mildly. Look, there have been cases, there have been times when the number of drones or missiles shot down was higher than the number that had been launched. That's already hard to believe, right? So, let's see. We've known for a while that the Patriots don't work. I mean, it's not that they don't work at all or that they don't shoot anything down. They do shoot some down, but they don't perform as they should. Not in Ukraine, not in Palestine, not anywhere. So, well, they're overrated. And indeed, there's been a recent modification that makes the Iskanders maneuverable. Now, there are two types of Iskanders, but basically, one of them is ballistic and the other is a cruise missile. Let's say Iskander is a missile launch system that has several options. As happens with almost all systems in general, they don't just have one type of ammunition, they have several types. The famous HIMARS, which you don't hear about anymore. Think about it, remember, at first, the HIMARS were going to change the war. Well, the Russians learned how to neutralize them, and now they're not even mentioned. Anyway, they have different types of ammunition. So the two main ones, the Iskander M and the Iskander K, one is a missile, the K, if I remember correctly, a cruise missile, meaning it flies more or less parallel to the Earth's surface. The other one isn't. The other is a ballistic, semi-ballistic missile that goes up and down. Well, the Iskander M, the one that goes up and down, the ballistic one, well, it seems they've also been taught to maneuver. So, the moment you have a maneuverable missile, the Patriots can forget about it, because there's nothing they can do. A maneuverable missile, no matter whose it is, Russian, Chinese, Martian, from the Belgian Congo, it doesn't matter. Let's not forget that the Patriots, even if they've been modernized and updated and so on, are very old missiles. I mean, their design dates back, well, to the last century. There were already Patriots in the 90s. I'm not sure exactly when the first one came out, but possibly in the 80s, the late 80s, I don't know. But we're talking about, as you said earlier, Fernando.
Before. In the first Gulf War, you'll remember the Scud interceptions. I already remember them back then as a defensive system that was already a bit old.
That's why I say that no matter how much they've been modernized, yes, they may be better. We're talking about a weapon system designed and conceived for an era that's now long gone. I mean, back then nobody had maneuverable missiles. It's the same with the Tomahawks. The Tomahawks, even though they've been modernized, aren't maneuverable. I mean, it's still a missile, well, a subsonic cruise missile, but it's nothing special anymore. I mean, everyone has cruise missiles like the Tomahawk now. So we're not talking about anything extraordinary. In fact, the KH-101s are better.
Yes, we're going over the targets a bit more. Just now in Odessa, in the north, here in Chernihiv. Basically in two main groups. This one of the major impacts, the Chernihiv electrical substation, right there in sight, completely in flames. And on the other hand, a bit further to the right, a bit further east, but also in the Chernihiv Oblast, in Bakhmut. Here at the Bakhmut fuel depot, energy infrastructure. Also, well, heavy strikes in this case, not only with drones, but also with missiles. All of this. Here are more images. Well, these are images of fuel depots burning, this in the northern area, where there were more impacts. Over here in Odessa as well, in the south, images of the port of Odessa, which we shouldn't forget, is one of the places where weapons also come in, through ships that supposedly carry other things. The anti-aircraft fire, useless, and the impacts, well, more and more. Tons of videos, really, all self-censored of course, so the location can't be determined for sure. But in each of them, there's at least one impact, sometimes more than one.
No, but also, these past few days, watching videos posted on Telegram channels and other sites, but mostly there, and watching videos from the Russians, from the Ukrainians, from Ukrainian channels. That is, what many people do is take a little piece of some program, post it, and subtitle it, roughly speaking. Well, the complaints are huge, at least from Ukrainian leaders. I've seen them there complaining about the ineffectiveness of certain weapon systems, about their generals, about a lot of things. And we're talking, for example, about Ukrainian members of parliament, obviously from Poroshenko's faction or other groups within the nationalist sphere, let's say, but critical of Zelensky, because they belong to the faction of former President Poroshenko. But we're seeing this constantly. So, well, and also power outages are getting worse.
In the south-central area, in Zaporizhzhia, there were also attacks on the Motor Sich checkpoint. This place here, no images, but it was attacked. And in this case, Fernando, what's interesting is that the attacks here were carried out with glide bombs. Of course, this is near the contact line. If I remember correctly, it's visible here on the map. Yes, right down here, Fernando. You can see the little white drawing, the white symbol. These bombs, these glide bombs, so not even expended missiles, but directly bombs launched from, well, they can have a range of almost 100 kilometers. These glide bombs. And right now,
The front line in Zaporizhzhia is already relatively close to Zaporizhzhia city, the capital of the region with the same name. So they're pounding away, and one of the things they're also showing is that the famous geraniums, the geranium 2s and 3s, the 3s are the ones with jet engines, have been fitted with cameras that allow them to hunt, meaning to attack in real time, with those cameras the trains going back and forth. And this means that right now, there's practically no train that can move.
Because quickly, right here, in this city called Shostka, there were also attacks with geraniums against trains. Here are some of the images. Over here, well, a car completely destroyed, a locomotive, and the noise of the geraniums again in this railway junction. But besides that, over here, this one is spectacular, Fernando. This one too, well, here, well, the locomotive of a train formation at this railway junction in Shostka was hit. And once again, the geraniums in action, now against trains. Which means that not only the energy infrastructure, but also the railway system, and therefore transportation in general, is being attacked multiple times, targeting what appear to be train-related objectives. A devastating winter. Why? Because they're hitting power plants, fuel depots, railway hubs. So, transportation, electricity, fuel, heating, energy in general, cut off. Transport, at least for weapons and troops, cut off as well. A devastating winter ahead, right, Fernando?
Invierno devastador a la vista, ¿verdad, Fernando?
Indeed, let's hope, and I say let's hope, and I'll explain why in a moment. Let's hope they stay on this course, because the Russians already made the same mistake. For whatever reasons, it's not easy to understand why they did what they did. But anyway, as we've pointed out many times, when General Surovikin takes command in 2022 after the victorious offensives, well, the victorious Kharkiv offensive by the Ukrainian army, General Surovikin takes over. He's the one who later builds the famous Surovikin defensive line and carries out the withdrawal from Kherson, from it would be the, I think, right side. I can never remember which is the right and which is the left, depending on how you look at the map. Anyway, the riverbank that is currently occupied by the Ukrainians, they withdraw from that area and begin systematic bombings against power plants mainly, or rather, against power plants too, but more so against relays, against substations. And that was already depriving Ukraine of electricity, for reasons, as I said, that are hard to understand at the beginning of 2023 that stopped. Then it started again intermittently, and now it seems that since this summer, they are increasingly and systematically attacking the energy systems essential for the survival of any state. I mention this because, if that had continued, the The result would have been the same but faster, with fewer deaths, much better, and with less destruction.
Y mucho mejor y con menos destrucción. Porque en el momento que acabas con el sistema eléctrico.
Because the moment you take down a country's electrical system, the war is over and everything ends. So, well, I hope they keep doing it now and finish settling the issue of the war in Ukraine relatively quickly. Because, as I said, if they keep hammering the energy systems, it's no longer a matter of weaponry or of whether you have more or fewer troops on the front line. It won't be a matter of anything. It'll be a matter of what happened here, let's remember, in Spain, with the famous blackout that lasted 10 or 12 hours, and the whole country not knowing what to do, except for those who had battery-powered radios, because no one knew what was going on. Well, it was about 10 or 12 hours. If you completely de-electrify Ukraine for weeks, I mean, they're already attacking. There's a video I saw the other day where they were repairing an electrical substation and they were working on one side and you can see a Garen coming in and boom, it hits the other side. So, well, this will save lives. It will save lives, and besides, it's not going to change the outcome of the war. I mean, the war was going to be won by the Russians from the start. The war will be won by the Russians in the end. And above all, it will deter, and this is also very important, the crazy Europeans. The Europeans are determined to go to war, as we said before, against the Russians. It's really something incredible. They know they're going to lose too. Well, there might be someone who believes they're going to win, but anyway, the moment the Ukrainians are completely defeated, the escalation, the madness of the Europeans, that's when it will end. I mean, they might keep trying to confront the Russians and cause them problems, but the main proxy, the main battering ram that Europe has against Russia, which is Ukraine. So at that point, in some way, the Europeans would have to collapse, because they too would be defeated. Let's not forget that. And since the Americans were going to completely wash their hands of this and pin the defeat and the mess on the Europeans, well, that's the best thing that could happen.
Here, Fernando, the last point of the attacks to wrap up the report. In the east, in line with our analysis, a gas plant here in Hipka was also attacked by drones. So specifically, north, east and west have all been hit with the full Russian arsenal, aiming to destroy energy and transport infrastructure ahead of winter, with the goal of speeding up the outcome of the war. What has the Ukrainian response been so far, Fernando?
¿Cuál es la reacción ucraniana hasta el momento, Fernando?
Well,
as we've come to expect from Zelensky, composure, calm, serenity, he's now having a full-blown nervous breakdown. And he's already saying things like, until yesterday he was all about, give me tomahawks, I want tomahawks, if they give us tomahawks, we'll win, and so on, whatever. And now he's proposing an aerial truce, meaning that the Ukrainians would stop attacking Russia with drones, and the Russians would stop attacking Ukraine with their drones and missiles. But this obviously is the result of the desperation of the Ukrainians and the Europeans, who are also desperate. Because this whole, let's say, frenzy to go to war as soon as possible comes from the fact that they know the Ukrainians are losing and that they are going to lose. And not that they'll lose in 10 years. They won't make it past next year. That is, everything depends on how much the Russians want to speed up their operations. And in my opinion, given the Europeans' madness and certain soft hands, they should finish them off and make it clear that any provocation, no matter how small, will be met with unprecedented brutality. Because, of course, we're all day with these ghost drones, drones up and down, they're everywhere. Then we have all kinds of provocations in the Baltic, which have been going on for a long time, in the Baltic Sea. We're dealing with provocations, well, with inventions, with, well, provocations. What I mentioned last Friday, the supposed shadow ships, the Russian shadow oil tankers. Well, tankers that aren't even Russian, meaning this one was registered, I think, in Benin, in Africa. But the French, when passing by there near France, boarded the ship just like that, for no reason, in international waters, simply because they felt like it. I mean, a textbook act of piracy. Because according to them, since they were already fantasizing, they went all in. Not only is it part of the Russian ghost fleet of oil or gas tankers, but it's also a drone carrier. From there, they supposedly launched the drones that are invading Europe. Absolutely unbelievable. So what's going on?
Algo absolutamente increíble. Bueno, ¿qué pasa? Que al día siguiente lo sueltan.
The next day they let him go. You say, why did you even arrest him? Macron's explanation, he's a strategist, as everyone knows, a man who plans long-term with a global vision, right? And he says, no, I just came up with something, you know? While I was with Brigitte and she was giving me a few slaps, it's like the slaps shook my brain and made me think a little. And that's his bright idea, right? They say, no, we can affect the Russians by doing the following: detaining supposed gas ships and such from their shadow fleet, holding them for a few days or weeks, and then releasing them. Well, of course, since they can't prove anything, what we're doing is making them take longer to reach their destination ports. You say, how brilliant, really. This man deserves a Nobel Prize. I mean, you couldn't be more idiotic.
By the way, the images show a boarding that was agreed upon with the crew. That's why they placed the ladder, to make it easier. But without leaving, Fernando, the topic of the attack on Ukraine.
Sure, well, they're in panic mode.
They're doing these things. Before moving on to the next topic, I wanted to present this column, this article from the Washington Post, no less. Russian airstrike in Ukraine damages power grids and kills 5 people. The attack with drones and missiles hit 9 regions and left tens of thousands of people without electricity. As Russia intensifies its energy war before winter in Ukraine, 5 deaths have been reported, according to Ukrainian sources. All deaths, of course, are regrettable. Still, it's striking that given the number and scale of the attacks, there were only 5 deaths. Or well, I don't know. Really, surgical or a misleading figure. Because just with the explosions we've just seen, a tiny fraction of the available videos, that alone should have caused far more than 5 deaths, certainly. And here, Fernando, in this column, there's a reference to what was mentioned earlier about the problems with the Patriot systems following the modification of Russian missiles. Pay attention to this, Fernando. The Patriot systems, made in the United States, are the only defense systems capable of reliably intercepting the Russian ballistic missiles that regularly terrorize the civilian population, striking apartment buildings, businesses, and other civilian infrastructure. Well, remember, this is the Washington Post. If all the impacts we just saw had been on residential infrastructure, instead of 5, it would be 50,000.
But look, they're just so bad, yeah.
In fact, pay attention to this confession. These systems have failed to intercept some recent attacks, including the one on Kyiv, partly because Russia keeps modifying its missiles to evade them, according to experts. The Washington Post, dear Fernando.
Washington Post, querido Fernando.
Manipulating their own missiles so they won't be shot down. Wow, how wicked those Russians are. It's laughable. No, but of course you say, let's see, those missiles and all that, they're falling, destroying houses, cities, everything. Factories, residential areas, administrative buildings. You'd think that anyone who just read this would say they're killing hundreds of thousands of people. An Israeli-style massacre. That is, and no. Then Baran tells you, even in the headline, 5 people died in the latest attack. Let's see. You were telling me that they've attacked the whole country. that everything's been destroyed and only 5 people have died. Well, no. I mean, you're contradicting yourself. You can't tell me that story about the country being ravaged like Attila's troops, and then tell me that in the latest and most brutal attack, with more than 500 drones and missiles, however many, there were 5 deaths. Because, come on, I don't know, every weekend on Spanish roads there are more deaths in car accidents than that.
I mean, really, the manipulation of the missiles. If the United States, Ukraine, Israel, or any NATO country were to modify their missiles to avoid interception, they would present it as an improvement, a modernization, a refinement of the missiles. But here it's called manipulation.
The perverse action, that is to say, of course, no. The other thing would be, indeed, the progress, the prodigious and extraordinary technological progress that once again demonstrates American superiority over the Russians. They've achieved maneuverability and all that. No, not now. Now it's the perverse Russians who manage, in a crooked way, I'm sure they copied it from the Americans and so on, right? Well, something like that, right? They're so clumsy, so bad at propaganda already. They're shameless. Put a little more effort into it. Work on it a bit more. You can't come out with that headline trying to tell me that 5 people or 5 civilians have died, and then tell me they're devastating everything, and then tell me that when the Russians improve their missiles, they're evil and doing something perverse, but when the others improve theirs, they're not. I mean, it's laughable.
Fernando, how about we leave Europe aside for now and start analyzing the situation in the Middle East, which is getting increasingly tense, though now with an unprecedented development since yesterday, following Hamas's very shrewd response to Donald Trump's peace plan. You'll recall, Donald Trump presented a 20-point peace plan. Israel reluctantly agreed to it after some modifications, expecting Hamas to reject it. However, Hamas responded very cleverly with an acceptance that included implicit conditions.
Con condiciones implícitas. Aquí la respuesta de Hamas.
Here is Hamas's response. This is Hamas's response, approving the plan. Here, after a thorough study, the movement has made its decision and issued the following reply to the brother mediators. Hamas appreciates the Arab, Islamic, and international efforts, as well as the efforts of US President Donald Trump. Clever of Hamas here too, in this response, with the flattery toward Trump, always beneficial in any negotiation with Trump. And in this context, they validate the plan. Where exactly is the sentence? One moment of patience.
Exactamente, un segundo de paciencia. En este contexto y de manera que se logre el fin de la guerra y la retirada total.
In this context, and with the aim of ending the war and achieving the total withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the movement announces its approval to release all prisoners of the occupation, both the living and the bodies of the deceased, in accordance with the exchange formula included in President Trump's proposal, and with the provision of appropriate field conditions to carry out the exchange process. The movement also reiterates its approval to hand over the administration of the Gaza Strip to a Palestinian body composed of independents based on Palestinian national consensus. And here are some additional points aimed at stopping the war in the Gaza Strip. Achieving a prisoner exchange, allowing the immediate entry of humanitarian aid, rejecting the occupation of the Strip, and opposing the displacement of our Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip. We endorse this plan.
De la Franja de Gaza, convalidamos este plan, con lo cual, de todas las condiciones del...
Thus, out of all the conditions in the 20 points established in Trump's peace plan, they took all those beneficial to Hamas and to Palestine. Here are the 20 points. Which are the 20 points accepted by Hamas? Well, first, the ceasefire. Second, the exchange of prisoners in return for the release of hostages, naturally, but with prisoners released by Israel. One of the goals sought by Hamas from the beginning, amnesty for Hamas members. Another benefit for Hamas fighters, the increase in humanitarian aid, the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces, and the establishment of a government without Hamas, but not one of digital technocrats, as Trump's peace plan proposed, but of independent Palestinians.
Independientes palestinos, ¿sí?
Or
were you saying digital technocrats or analog genocides like Tony Blair?
Claro, pero eso lo rechazan, o por lo menos eso no lo convalidan.
Of course, but they reject that, or at least they don't validate it. They state, yes, we want a government of independent Palestinians, and the Palestinians will determine their own destiny in the future. Naturally, among the conditions accepted by Hamas is also that the people of Gaza remain in Gaza with no displacement, a rejection of displacement. All of this was validated within the framework of the approval, but without mentioning the demilitarization of Hamas included in the plan, and without any reference to international experts determining Gaza's future. No, they say the people of Gaza will determine it. This is Hamas's response. Israeli politicians immediately reacted, naturally Netanyahu as well, Lindsey Graham, and so on. All of them outraged.
También Lindsey Graham, etcétera, todos ellos indignados. Sí, pero en realidad connota una.
Yes, but in reality it implies a rejection of the plan. In fact, it rejects the plan. But Trump, wanting his plan to succeed for various reasons, among them gas and investment deals, his famous Nobel Prize, responded satisfactorily. He never accepted my plan. We're going to end a 3,000-year conflict, according to Trump. 3,000 years, really? And then, suddenly Netanyahu found himself at a crossroads, in a dilemma. Either he rejected the plan initially accepted by Israel and later by Hamas, the plan proposed by Trump, and provoked a confrontation with Trump, or he reluctantly went along with it. But his far-right allies in the government would abandon the coalition. And that would bring down his government, and therefore almost certainly lead to his imprisonment due to the pending trials.
Por los juicios pendientes. Además de todo eso, comenzaron, lógicamente.
In addition to all that, many demonstrations naturally began in Israel for Netanyahu himself to finally implement this agreement and for it to lead to the release of the hostages. So more pressure on Netanyahu in that regard. Also, for example, demonstrations, this time in Tel Aviv, demanding the approval of this plan, and well, with a very critical speech toward Netanyahu, calling for the acceptance of this plan and the release of the hostages through it. Right? Always a bit of repression here and there. Yes, so that it doesn't, there, the sign saying, end this war.
Ahí el cartel de End This War, terminen esta guerra. Este señor diciendo.
This man saying, first of all, we have to end the war.
Esta guerra no está alcanzando nada, no es buena para nada.
This war isn't achieving anything. It's not good for anyone. Well, Fernando, that's the situation. We're getting a bit more from this man's protest. All eyes on Trump. Pressure too. We don't know what's going to happen, neither with Trump nor with Hamas. But this is one of the first times we have hope of reaching an agreement for the hostages. We're here to pressure our government to accept this plan. Fernando, your take on this unprecedented situation, with Trump and Hamas apparently wanting a ceasefire, and Netanyahu, on the other hand, rejecting it because he needs the war to continue for his political fate.
Por la necesidad de la continuidad de la guerra para su destino político.
Pues efectivamente, así es. Es decir, a ver, yo creo que aquí han.
Well, yes, that's right. I mean, I think that here Hamas has managed to play very skillfully in a situation of tactical maneuvers, so to speak. That's what we're seeing now. Nobody believes, not Netanyahu, not Hamas, not Trump, that this could really lead to a lasting peace agreement. Nobody believes that. So, well, what this is about is moving in such a way that you put the other side in a difficult position so that it's the other side that rejects it, allowing you to say, no, I accepted it, but it's the others who don't want to accept it, the opponents, the enemies, who don't want to accept it. Well, he's moved very skillfully there, as you rightly pointed out, saying, no, well, yes, as we know, they don't tell you this outright, but come on, since they know that what most mobilizes the Israeli population, and one of the things that has most pitted Netanyahu's government against his own people, is the issue of the hostages, then we'll grant them this. We already know that this, we'll see later if it actually gets implemented, at least the hostage exchange, which remains to be seen. But anyway, on paper we acknowledge it, meaning that from there we pass the ball to Netanyahu, because as we're seeing, the pressure will come, saying, no, well yes, Hamas has agreed to return all the hostages, the living and the dead. That is, well, he hasn't exactly said no either. He's left some things hanging, kind of ambiguous. Well, we'll see the details later, right? And that has exposed Netanyahu, leaving him in a weak position, to the point that he's had to, as always when he finds himself in these situations, negotiate with his own allies in the government. He met today, I'm not sure if I heard it yesterday, but anyway, with Smotrich and the more radical ones, to keep them from leaving the government and bringing it down, as you rightly pointed out. He must have offered them something, anyway. And well, he's trying to keep a government together in a situation, let's not forget, where Israel is preparing to attack Iran. So, it's not in his interest right now to have two open fronts. Well, we're seeing that Netanyahu at first said, yes, Trump's thing is great. Then with that arrogance that characterizes him, and since he's a bit of a loudmouth, when he got to Israel, he said, well, no, but this, we said yes, but then the troop deployment in Gaza will remain, and that thing about withdrawing, nothing, that's just a fairy tale. So now he finds himself in a situation where, at least temporarily, he'll have to, in a hypocritical way, say, yes, more or less, even though we already know that his yes is really a no. But well, he'll have to put on a show, pretend, that is, act theatrically until he can, in that maneuver, get rid of one of the two. In other words, he can't have several fronts open at once. One of two things. Being forced to make a deal with Hamas is precisely so that his hands are free and he can focus on Iran, which we all know is already prepared, agreed upon, and has the Americans' approval. And their involvement is only just beginning. Supplies, missile systems, tanks, Israeli and American, as I was saying, in short, preparing for what everyone already takes for granted. Let's not forget that a particularly significant date is approaching. This coming day 7 marks 2 years since the war began, or since this period of war, let's say, of conflict. So that's where he just put the pressure on them, saying, look, you have the opportunity on the anniversary to say, Mr. Netanyahu, that you stand for the release of the hostages, that you're committed, and that the issue of the hostages is now settled. The matter of the hostages for his work, as well, is something he's interested in keeping alive, that there continue to be hostages. As long as there are hostages, there can always be, over time, that return of hostages where, from time to time, it looks like negotiations are happening, even if they're not real. And there's always the excuse that no, we have to continue the war because the hostages are still in Hamas's hands. Now, if there are no hostages in Hamas's hands, then that excuse also falls apart. And as I said, the hostages, which he has used in a deceitful way whenever it suited him, well, this is an issue that, as I said, deeply affects the population. You could already see it in the images you showed us, and it's becoming more and more evident. The population's exhaustion, not only with the hostage issue, but with a war that drags on endlessly. This was supposed to last 3 months. It's been 2 years, and the population even suspects they're going to have another war with the Iranians. Because let's not forget that this has happened in a situation where Hamas has been fighting against Israel, or Israel against Hamas, for these 2 years, with a few brief moments of relative calm, that is, truces that Israel never respects, but, well, more or less. Then we have the active phase of Hezbollah's war against Israel. And that was very hard for Israel, because it became clear that they were overwhelmed on all fronts and couldn't finish off Hezbollah, despite the decapitation of its leadership, and so on. Then came the 12-day war with Iran, when the Israelis realized that neither the Iron Dome shield, nor David's sling, nor the Arrow missiles, nor the American Patriot systems could stop them. There was no way to stop them, and they were hit hard. And when things start falling on you, and it's no longer just a regular Hezbollah rocket, but missiles with significant destructive power, and they're also destroying you, as happened with the Haifa refinery, meaning key energy infrastructure, then things change. And it lasted 12 days, not 12 years.
Here is Trump's latest post about this, after many self-congratulatory posts about his fantastic peace plan. Following the negotiations, Israel has agreed to the initial withdrawal line, which we have shown and shared with Hamas. Once Hamas confirms it, the ceasefire will take effect immediately. The exchange of hostages and prisoners will begin, and conditions will be created for the next phase of the withdrawal, bringing us closer to the end of this 3,000-year catastrophe. Thank you for your attention, and stay tuned. Now, according to various sources, this acceptance by Netanyahu's government of the start of the first phase of this peace plan, following Hamas's response, would have come after an exchange between Netanyahu and Trump that was, according to the sources, more or less hostile.
Más o menos hostil de acuerdo a las fuentes. Atención a Axios estadounidense, la primera.
Attention to Axios, a US outlet, the first one, this one, the first from here. Here exclusive, Trump on the Gaza deal. I told him, Bibi, this is your chance for victory. President Trump told Axios on Saturday that we are close to a peace deal in Gaza. I told Bibi, this is your chance to win. He seemed fine with it, Trump said. He has to be. He has no other choice. With me, you have to win. On Saturday morning, the Israeli army shifted to defensive operations in Gaza and halted its airstrikes beyond those necessary for force protection, according to the Israeli armed forces. Trump expressed his appreciation for Israel's decision to temporarily stop the bombings. Behind the scenes, on Friday, before Trump publicly asked Israel to halt its attacks, he spoke with Netanyahu by phone. In the interview with Axios, Trump said his team had warned him before the call that Netanyahu had reservations. However, he claimed that when they spoke, Netanyahu agreed to move forward. That's one version, a somewhat friendly exchange. But here's another version from the Israeli press. In the Times of Israel, Trump told the Prime Minister, in a tense phone call after Hamas responded to the Gaza deal, "You're always so damn negative." This is a victory. In English, "You're always so fucking negative." Just like that, word for word, from Trump to Netanyahu, the President of the United States told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to be so damn negative during a tense phone call. Well, according to a US official, Netanyahu told Trump that Hamas's ambivalent response was nothing to celebrate. I don't know why you're so negative. This is a victory. Take advantage of it. Well, according to this version, a clash, maybe true, maybe not. Now, I remember a very similar staging also of a confrontation between Trump and Netanyahu days before the surprise attack on Iran.
Exactly. I think right now it could also be a distraction. I mean, we're all focusing on this so-called peace plan of Trump's, just as they're getting ready to attack Iran. In other words, you shift attention away from your real objective. Well, yes, probably. I think they both more or less tell you the same thing. I can more easily imagine Trump saying you're fucking negative than saying it in a more polite or gentlemanly way. I mean, no, I can see it, right? But yeah, it suits Trump more to say things like that. Well, I mean, yes, everyone. One thing is what they represent when they speak in public, and what they tell in the newspapers. The leaks. Most of the leaks the media get are self-serving, meaning they're leaks that I make because I want to reveal something I don't want to be known, but I do it in a public and official way. Let's not forget that. So as I was saying, Trump is right when he says, look, accept this, it gets the hostage problem off your back, and then we'll find some pretext to continue the war against Hamas. But really, what difference does it make to stop for a month?
Pero bueno, ¿qué más te da parar durante un mes? Y retirarte, pues si ya te has retirado un montón de veces.
And to withdraw, but you've already withdrawn a bunch of times. I mean, let's not forget this is the second one, Gideon's Chariots 2. So, at this rate, it's going to look like one of those movie franchises with 5, 6, 7 sequels. The thing is, Netanyahu knows perfectly well that no matter how many operations he carries out in Gaza, he's not going to defeat Hamas. That's not even his goal, right? Let's be honest. His real goal is, and that's the hard part, either an ethnic cleansing, and as long as Egypt refuses, there's nothing to be done. Because the ethnic cleansing would have to take place in the Sinai, and Egypt won't go along with that. They won't, because it would mean the fall of al-Sisi's regime. It would mean al-Sisi would stop being president. That's the reality. Because it would mean losing the Sinai and creating instability with its own enemies. Let's not forget that Egypt, where al-Sisi came to power through a coup d'etat to remove the Muslim Brotherhood, whose president at the time, I can't recall his name, was from the Muslim Brotherhood. That is, after a series of protests, and so on. Because the Muslim Brotherhood had won the elections, and Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. So in fact, it's also said that those who, let's say, gave a little push and advised them to accept the plan were the Turks. That is, Erdogan. Erdogan belongs to the Muslim Brotherhood, just like the Qataris. In other words, they're all cut from the same cloth. So then, since ethnic cleansing is unfeasible, and, well, genocide, whatever we want to call it, or the total slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza, well, that's in short very, very difficult. It takes a long time, even if it's made as easy for him as it is. So then he's left more and more with all kinds of pressure from all sorts of things, but, well, international and so on, given the outrageous things he's doing. Well, as I said, Trump could very well have told him, look, stop with the nonsense. We already know this is going to be resolved militarily, even if we don't know how. But anyway, these people are delusional, and so are their advisors and their military. So, well, a truce for a while, however long is necessary, because what we can't do is keep an open war against Hamas, with your ground forces supposedly bogged down, stuck in Gaza, with a population that's going to be protesting because you won't achieve anything, and at the same time try to attack Iran. No, it's not compatible. And the Americans, I'm sure their priority, despite all those resort deals and the idea of making Gaza an official country and all that from Trump and company, is the issue of Iran. And deep down Netanyahu, well, not him personally because he's under judicial pressure, but let's say those who support him, those who keep his government afloat, would rather take down Iran than take down Hamas. That's not to say they'll succeed, but anyway. So, I think what we're seeing is this. A vile stance from Hamas saying yes, but the main thing yes, but we'll see later. In other words, a yes that neither Netanyahu nor Trump can reject, but a yes that at the same time both Hamas and the other players, including Netanyahu, know will destroy them. Meaning that agreement has no future. It's just that it's never going to be carried through to the end, because Netanyahu will blow it up first. Now with this, what they're trying to avoid is him blowing it up before the hostage exchange. Maybe there'll still be some kind of incident, but most likely there will be a hostage exchange, because the pressure on Netanyahu is already very strong. And if he destroys it again using any pretext, that they've attacked something or whatever, and so we have to respond and break the agreements, it's not going to go down well with his own population. So at the very least, he'll have to hold out for a few weeks. 1, 2, 3, I don't know how many. That is until the hostages are exchanged. And, well, then at some point he'll go back. I mean, he'll destroy the agreements, of course, blaming Hamas, obviously.
All right. Anything else left to say about Gaza, Fernando, before we jump back to Europe?
Toward Europe? No, at first to say now that we're on our way to Europe. Look, I have to put it this way, like a newspaper headline, but that's how it is. It's important to point out that in the Czech Republic, ANO won. No joke, huh? ANO won, which means but in Spanish. It means but in Spanish, but not in Czech. In Czech, it's a political party whose acronym, when read in Spanish, is ANO. What can we do? Just like the far-right party in Poland is PiS. Between ANO and PiS, that's where we are. I mean, but who's gonna do it? Well, this is important. I mean, because in the unruly government where the count has already been done and all that, it's already known that the supporters of the European Union, even adding a party called the Pirate Party and so on, don't add up. Then they'll have the Czech pro-NATO president, a former NATO general who will have a government that I wouldn't call it pro-Russian, but rather anti-Ukraine war.
Yes, this Babiš, precisely the ANO candidate, Fernando. Poor artificial intelligence trying to translate this into English.
Of course, this is the ANO candidate, man. Let's see.
The ANO candidate Babiš, yes, unlike the doubts about PS, right?
Here they also used to tell that old joke, pardon the silliness. They said something like, what was the name of the president who succeeded Roosevelt, Harry Truman? No, because Roosevelt was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the other one is Harry. Dumb Truman. Or no, dumbass Truman. It's a very old joke. Delano, dumbass. Anyway, what can you do? Well, this is important.
Neck and neck with the bad jokes about Zelensky, Fernando.
Look, that really upset me. Zelensky coming here trying to outdo me, that's just not acceptable. But no, this is important, because it would mean a new government in a country from the Eastern Bloc opposing the European Union, basically. Exactly.
Here are the images from another election day, but these are the local elections in Georgia, with a truly very positive result for the government, for the Georgian Dream Party. 80% in favor. However, that 20% of opponents caused disturbances throughout the Georgian capital, even attempting to enter the government house. Here are some of the images. That is indeed the government house. This happened in Georgia, an attempt at a new color revolution yesterday, with US flags, European Union flags. Well, the usual suspects, right? There are the little flags. What a coincidence.
Let's see this. Well, once again, I already know how many attempts at color revolutions this government has made in Georgia, but come on. Since the previous legislature and with this one in total, there must have been about 5 or 6 attempts. The usual story. I mean, what's happening now is that things look worse for the opposition, if we can call them that. The opposition funded by the United States and the European Union, who, as always, respect democratic elections. And every time there are elections in Georgia, whether before, during, or even after, they try to overthrow the government through protests.
This
is the new attempt. There were elections, as you rightly pointed out, for local governments, mayorships, and so on. In the capital's mayoral race in Tbilisi, the candidate from Georgian Dream won with about 70 or 80% of the votes. And of course, the former president of Franco-Georgian origin, so to speak, came out saying, very good, let people take to the streets and overthrow the government. something that is always very democratic. And well, as I said, now things are more difficult for them because it's already come out. Well, they went, let's see, they tried to attack the president's house.
Intentaron atacar la casa del presidente. Intentaron luego dirigirse a la sede central del partido.
They then tried to head to the headquarters of the Georgian Dream Party, where the founders were. A guy with a lot of money, the one who, well, ended up taking down Saakashvili and his crew. He's the president of the party, but he doesn't hold any office. He's neither the president of the country nor the prime minister. Let's say he stays in the background. And they also went to attack that. Well, fires, you know, the usual in these situations. Basically textbook stuff. A soft coup attempt, a color revolution, straight out of the manual. And what ended up happening is that they weren't successful. And this is important. The government has said, well, that's it. This is fine now, right? So many attempts to put an end to it. And it has said that several members of the opposition who have been participating in and chanting at these demonstrations have been declared part of an attempted coup d'etat and have been thrown in jail. To begin with, specifically, well, my Georgian doesn't go very far, but anyway, for example, Pata Manjgaladze, probably mispronounced, who is a member of the opposition from the United National Movement. Ruslan Samkmakia, well, the former head of the special forces under the previous government, and also members of the same party. Well, another deputy, a number of opposition figures who have been openly promoting this, what we're seeing here. And, well, they've said it's over, that they've had 4 or 5 already, and that's enough. And also, well, there have been many scandals with the first. Look, I have a map here. They have attacked, or tried to attack, the presidential palace, the parliament as well, and the headquarters of the Georgian Dream Party, the main office. And then, of course, the European Union ambassador, siding with the protesters. They've already said it would be better if he kept quiet. And I also had here a very, well, funny one, so to speak. Somewhere around here I had it, a tweet from a lady, here she is, named Rasa Huni, unpronounceable, Huna Finshine or something like that. This lady with the unpronounceable last name isn't Georgian, she's, I don't know, Lithuanian or something like that, who can tell. She made a call to support the protests in Tbilisi. She's a Lithuanian MEP, clearly. And then a statement from the European Union, right? Georgia needs our attention and our help. Today is the most important day of the Georgian protests for them to join Georgia, Europe, and so on. This, I mean, blatantly so.
Yes, and then they grumble about, sure, but it's not interference, huh?
This isn't interference, no. It's an opinion, a democratic opinion.
The
posts by Maya Sandu, by Kaja Kallas, all of them sponsoring the ousting protests in the context of an election with a clear winner. But well, that doesn't represent interference from Europe. It doesn't represent interference by the president of Moldova in Georgia's local elections. This is the level of madness. But anyway, this is the current context of anti-Russian Europe and the war.
And on top of that, the serious thing about all this is that Georgians are not pro-Russian. Not at all. They simply don't want, as they've said many times, to end up like Ukraine, which is not the same thing. But I'm anti-Russian.
Fernando, that's categorized as outright pro-Putin. Of course, if you're not with me, you're against me. Exactly. If you don't want a nuclear war against Russia, then you're pro-Putin. That's the current state of European politics. And speaking of that, Fernando, a few days ago in Copenhagen, over 2 or 3 days, there was a meeting of the European Council where Ursula von der Leyen was going to present her plan for a drone wall, a wall of drones, with 1 or 2 discussion topics, European defense and Ukraine.
Lo primero hay que decir que es alucinante, o sea, lo que decíamos antes.
The first thing to say is that it's unbelievable. I mean, as we said before, Europe is sinking like the Titanic, and the only two topics that matter are Ukraine and Ukraine. That is, we have to help Ukraine and build this defensive wall of drones. We've all gone mad. A devastating economic crisis. There's a fantastic video of Viktor Orban where he explains it perfectly. France with 120% of its GDP, Germany deindustrialized, Europe sinking, and you're debating building a wall of drones.
This is exactly what we wanted to present, Fernando. Here's the first post. Copenhagen, second day. The situation is serious. There are clearly warlike proposals on the table. They want to transfer European Union funds to Ukraine. They're trying to speed up Ukraine's accession through all kinds of legal maneuvers, and they want to finance the shipment of weapons. All these proposals clearly show that the Brussels crowd wants to go to war. I will stand firm on the Hungarian position, but this summit also shows that the coming months will focus on the threat of war. We will need the support of our political community and of all Hungarians who long for peace. Shortly after that, a very strong exchange here with Donald Tusk. Well, no, actually, it starts with Donald Tusk first. Prime Minister Viktor Orban, was it Russia that started the war against Ukraine? Were they the ones who decided that we should live in times of war? And in these times, the only question is, whose side are you on? Well, at least Donald Tusk is honest in this regard. Yes, we are already at war. A few days ago, in one of his speeches, he rejected the idea that the war is happening in Eastern Europe, far away, in an open reference to Trump. No. This is our war. This is Europe's war. This is Poland's war. Obviously referring to the war in Ukraine. And here Viktor Orban responded as follows. Dear Prime Minister Donald Tusk, Russia is at war, Ukraine is at war, Hungary is not. I understand that you are firmly on Ukraine's side. Please understand that we are firmly on Hungary's side. Your question is who will win the war between Russia and Ukraine. My question is how we can end the war, save tens of thousands of lives, and provide security for Hungarians. You seek to win a war you believe is yours. I want to ensure that peace prevails. Tapita tapon, that's what we used to call it when we were little in school.
And then they went on, there are even videos and stuff where they're teasing each other, laughing and joking. But in the one where Donald Tusk and Orban appear together, one says something, the other interrupts, the other snaps back, responds, Donald Tusk leaves, or maybe it was Viktor Orban, I don't even remember now. Anyway, the tension is clear and obvious. This is something...
Delusional. Absolutely delusional. In fact, they also address the issue of gas. For example, here's another one from Orban, along the same lines. Fernando, Brussels wants war to impose a common debt and seize more power, stripping member states of their authority. The arms industry seeks war to make profits. Meanwhile, powerful lobbying groups want to exploit the war to expand their influence. In the end, everyone is trying to take advantage of this fire. Our position is clear. Hungary will continue to defend peace and sovereignty. And here's a video of Orban. This video is key. I think the Brussels people, or Brusselians, I like Brusselians better, it sounds more reptilian. Yeah, or more like Star Trek. The Brussels people, which is the proper demonym, want war. The Brussels bureaucrats want this war because, through war, they can concentrate power. There's your friend Pedrito. They can take on more powers, or they can seize more powers from the nation-states, and they can collect huge amounts of money in their name. There goes Kaja Kallas. They can take over this money by creating a common debt. Sorry, a debt shared by all Europeans. In this way, nation-states are finished. And this gives momentum to the project of the United States of Europe. Some support him for that reason. Others support him simply for money.
No,
No, I was saying that if you want, I can translate it for you because I already have it translated. Ah, okay.
Bueno, ahora, escuchad una cosa, Fernando.
Now listen, Fernando. Spoken Hungarian gives us Spanish speakers the impression of a pleasant language, not harsh or cold like German or Russian. But then when you see it written, Fernando, completely incomprehensible, right?
Fernando,
nada.
inentendible, ¿no?
No, pero es verdad que el sonido.
No, but it's true that the sound, of course, it's not as harsh as German. It's hard to find anything harsher than German. But you don't understand a thing. I mean, like, Orban is speaking there and you don't understand anything. But what Viktor Orban is saying is key. Why is it key? Because I completely agree with them. I mean, how many times have we been saying that what these people want is to create totalitarian United States of Europe, where corporations rule, and where, in the end, the European Union becomes a full and absolute government, not elected by anyone, of a Europe where sovereign states will completely disappear, even more than they're already dissolved in the European Union now. And he answers that perfectly through mutualized debt, for example. The moment we have that, it's over. That is to say, moreover, a European Union that is increasingly taking on NATO's role. I mean, we can already see that they're absolutely uninterested in what happens to Europeans. They're solely and exclusively focused on how to win the war against the Russians in Ukraine, or on using Ukraine for that purpose. They don't even debate these things anymore. President Merz, as Viktor Orban also says somewhere in a video, has already told us that the welfare state is over, that budget allocations for education and healthcare must be cut, and things like that. And all of it with the same story about Russia. Fine. In another instance, Viktor Orban, the self-styled controller of the world, complains and says, look, the only thing left for him to say is, are you idiots or just pretending to be? He doesn't say it, but almost. Hey, have you looked at Hungary's geography? Hungary has no access to the sea. We need Russian oil and gas no matter what. Let me spell it out for you. We can't live off liquefied natural gas, we don't have a coastline, our refineries are set up only for Russian oil, and we're surviving thanks to Russian oil and gas. Well, Russian gas through the Turkish stream and oil because it's sent directly. In other words, and he says, but are you stupid? Or do you not realize that we have no other option? That we can't say no to Russian gas and oil even if we wanted to? He just says it like that, almost the way I'm saying it now. But come on, geography says, do you realize that Hungary has no access to the sea? That is to say, these are things one might say, look, no. These people are stubborn and increasingly nervous because they see their plans falling apart. In other words, as we said at the beginning, the Russians are stepping on the gas, and this means that with deep bombings, they are bleeding the Ukrainian economy dry, and above all, its energy sources. And these lunatics no longer know what to do. Hence the danger of the moment, Orban points out, because when they're desperate, those who are already incompetent under normal circumstances, they become even more incompetent in desperation, and they could mess things up over any trivial matter. This is getting out of their hands very easily. That is, it would get out of hand even for statesmen. We have to imagine this bunch of clowns handling such a delicate situation. And mind you, I started the video even though it was from last week with the statement, well, I started the video to make things clear, that no matter how moderate the Russians may be, the Russian ambassador to France made it clear. When an interviewer asks him, in any case, if a Russian plane crosses NATO airspace and one of those planes were shot down, what would Russia's reaction be? The ambassador replies, well, it would be war, obviously. So these people are playing with that.
Pues esta gente está jugando con esto. Es decir,
Por cierto, Putin en una entrevista.
By the way, Putin, in an interview, when asked about the possibility of the US Tomahawk missiles being delivered to Ukraine, replied that if such a delivery were to happen, it would mark the end of the rapprochement between the United States and Russia since Trump came to power in the US government. A direct message to Donald Trump regarding those missiles. Two more little things, Fernando. Here we go. By the way, how are the likes on this broadcast? 2,500 demolishers connected and 1,600 likes. Almost 1,000 demolishers hanging on to our broadcast, Fernando, without helping us with a thumbs up.
por favor, que vamos a acabar un día.
Please, please, we're going to end up hanging one day. Really hanging. I mean, we've lost the rope. I mean, because this is the path we're on. So likes, sharing, and all that stuff.
Share, comment, if you like us. Well, or if you don't like us, please join us anyway on our sister channel too. Of course, of course.
Claro. Y si nos quieren... No, y si nos quieren...
And if they want to make us millionaires, that's fine too. Make big donations. We have no problem with that.
Every Friday, Fernando on DMP Geopolitics. On Saturdays, Juan Antonio Aguilar, each with their own shows. A bunch of other phenomenal analysts. Don't miss out on them. And if you want to witness the Dionysian spectacle of Fernando speaking in English, well, you can join us on our English channel, Demolishing Myths of Politics, link below, translated with artificial intelligence, of course. Fernando, your English there is impressive, huh?
Fernando, impresionante tu inglés ahí, eh?
It took nothing less than the invention of artificial intelligence for me to be able to speak English in a somewhat decent way. Well, before, it was a horrible thing. That's what it took.
Sometimes artificial intelligence itself, Fernando, when you play with words like that, like before, with the candidate of the year and all that, it kind of gets lost in translation. But anyway, the servers are bursting into flames.
Blowing up the server farms and all that, those guys, well, fine, wouldn't be bad.
Images in the last segment. This one from Germany, Fernando, regarding Germany's involvement in the war and the recent airport disruptions in the past few weeks, attributed to Russian drones and many other issues. This is a video shared on TikTok. That's why they so often call for TikTok censorship. Attention, here are the images. It's not confirmed, but it apparently seems true. These are images taken on a Ukrainian plane full of wounded soldiers, landed at a German airport, waiting for ambulances for medical care. How else can this be described, if not as participating in a war, providing care to the wounded from one of the sides?
La atención de los heridos de una de las partes.
And maybe, let's see, these are beds inside a plane or whatever. I mean, that's clear. And they're lying down there, and that's an airport, and the staff are airport personnel. So yes, it's clear, we're seeing the plane there.
By the way, I personally don't reject providing aid or medical assistance. But if they only help one of the sides, then they're taking part in the war. They should respond with medical and humanitarian aid for all the wounded from all sides, logically.
Para todos los heridos de todas las partes, lógicamente.
That's what the International Red Cross used to do back then, and still does from time to time, which was created precisely to help all sides, regardless of what its members thought about who was better or worse. No, they didn't get into that. They didn't get into political issues, precisely to encourage or make it possible for both sides in conflicts to let them care for the wounded and the affected population.
Well, not this.
But also yesterday, in Munich and around there were drones, I think. Again.
And then there were also disruptions at the airport of one of the Baltic countries. Did you see that news, Fernando? The final resolution. I was just looking at that a little while ago, here, at the Vilnius airport. One second, Fernando, because I haven't prepared this.
Un segundito, Fernando, porque esto no preparado.
No, you have to start putting it in there.
No, but in the meantime, yes, go ahead.
No, bueno, con esto de los drones y demás.
No. Well, with all this about drones and so on, which are also in Belgium, they're all over Europe now. We already have drones. I used to like it better. I don't know, the whole UFO thing had more charm. I mean, back when people were seeing UFOs everywhere and all that. And now, in fact, I think they're going to form groups of people to go out at night to detect drones. And instead of going out to see if you can spot UFOs, like the ufologists used to do, the ones who studied extraterrestrials and all that, now it's about spotting drones, right? But really, this has reached such absolutely ridiculous extremes because on top of that, there's no evidence whatsoever, you know?
Well, here at last, some evidence was presented after the news, broadcast with drums, with the sound of war drums in the background, about the closure of the Vilnius airport due to the alleged presence of Russian drones in the air. Well, here's finally the explanation of what happened, reported by The Telegraph, a British publication. Pay attention to this, Fernando. Lithuanian airport closed because of cigarette smuggling balloons. Around 25 helium-filled inflatables, carrying thousands of counterfeit packs, crossed the border from Belarus. Well, in the end, instead of killer drones, they were just balloons carrying, get this, packs of cigarettes. Because in some European countries, cigarettes are cheaper than in others, since each country sets higher or lower taxes. That's why cigarette smuggling exists. And this nonsense, without any investigation whatsoever, was presented as a Russian killer drone attack, more or less, and it led to the closure of the airport in Vilnius.
This is the current level of delusion. This is indeed a mix of paranoia, seeing drones everywhere, and at the same time, a blatant attempt to make us believe, since they no longer know how, that the Russians are going to attack us. And well, therefore, they're supposedly sending us spy drones because they don't attack, meaning they don't bomb, so they must be for spying. They're spying on us everywhere. You open your window at home, and there's already a drone there, plugged in with a camera, watching what you're doing and all that. So yeah, I wouldn't even be surprised if, at some point in this drone hysteria, they stage a false flag attack, take one of their own drones, and crash it into something. Don't be surprised if it happens. But anyway, this is the level of political madness we have in Europe.
Speaking of lunatics, you might remember the president of Albania, Edi Rama. Yes, really, a clown.
Unforgettable, that one. How was it? The conference they held in Albania, I can't remember what it was about, with all their antics, proposing marriage and all that to Ursula. Anyway, some things. No, to Maloney. To whom? Oh, right, to Giorgia Meloni. Honestly, Meloni saying, why do I get all the fools?
That is to say, the one who kneeled, right?
Yes.
In the greeting, instead of shaking his hand and welcoming him to the summit. I don't remember which summit it was. What was it about?
Well, there are so many. The thing is, we don't realize that we Europeans have at least one summit a week about something. This is madness. There isn't a single week without a summit. Anyway, yes, that guy, very tall, totally inappropriate, and so on.
Always with sneakers, right? Always with white sneakers. Because he's cool, very cool. Well, here for the first time, with a good joke, at least a decent bit of humor. When Macron, here in the center, note the height difference, by the way, was chatting with the president of Azerbaijan, to his right, possibly in New York not long ago, at the United Nations, suddenly he jumped in with the following. Do you want the explanation before the joke or after, Fernando?
¿Quieren la explicación antes del chiste o después, Fernando?
No, let's see. Yeah, no. Well, we have to remind people what Trump had said.
Exactly. Remember it, please, Fernando.
Well, among many other things, among the 259,479 wars he has pacified and won, one of them was the war between Albania and Azerbaijan. A non-existent war, but who cares?
Instead of Azerbaijan versus Armenia, he remembered it as Azerbaijan, an invented country, by the way. Azerbaijan versus Albania, located thousands of kilometers away. That's why we have the Albanian president's joke here.
I've resolved wars that were considered unsolvable. Azerbaijan and Albania.
We'll hear for the first time a good joke.
Yeah, well, but this was an idea of chaos. When you realize it, you say Europeans laugh at Trump because he's a hick. Trump humiliates them and laughs at them because they don't matter. So in the end, you say, this is our political class. In the end, they're both right. Trump is a hick, and these guys are nobodies. But there's also something amusing about how it captures the Europeans' sense of superiority. Even the Albanians, over the rest of humanity. An American hick. Well, what can you expect from Americans? Well, it could even be extended. The thing is, since they don't have the power the Americans have, what could you expect from the rest of the world? That thing Burrell said about the savages in the garden, well, this is just more proof of that European sense of superiority. Moral, well, cognitive, of every kind. They have that European supremacism of, well, we're the cradle of almost everything good and great humanity has invented, except for the pyramids of Egypt. And that's only because we hadn't shown up yet. And from there, they feel they have to look at the rest with condescension, looking down on them. Well, Macron can't look down.
Cleopatra, in love with the European heartthrob.
Of course. So once again, the Europeans, right, Cleopatra, first in love with Julius Caesar, although Julius Caesar said, yeah, fine, we have faith and all that, but then he went off to conquer things and left her hanging. The one who did fall into her trap, apparently, was Mark Antony, up until the Battle of Actium, where they really gave him a beating, a proper one and all that. And then, well, anyway, you just can't mix business with love, as they say here.
The love of Julius Caesar, not of Alexander the Great. My bad.
No, of Julius Caesar and then of Mark Antony.
Well, I must, yes, recall my readings of Asterix and Obelix in this regard.
Indeed, you make it perfectly clear there.
Yes, right? Now I remembered the episode. Well, Fernando, about the ending. What a nose. Yes.
Goscinny and Uderzo's adaptation of Julius Caesar is phenomenal. Cleopatra was supposedly famous for her nose. That's more legend than anything else. But anyway, so they play that joke where every time someone sees Cleopatra, whether it's Julius Caesar, Asterix and Obelix and so on, they go, what a nose and all that.
Querido Fernando, sobre el final, y una vez más, demoledores y demoledoras.
Dear Fernando, about the ending, and once again, demolishers, remember to support us, please, with a thumbs up. Meanwhile, the segment in China. That's it. Pay attention to this. No music, just in case. The launch of a hypersonic missile from the Husai Missile Test Center in Shanxi Province took place on September 29, 2005, just a few days ago, in China, successfully. The projectile traveled approximately 2,000 kilometers at speeds exceeding Mach 5, more than 6,000 kilometers per hour. During the test, it demonstrated advanced capabilities of the hypersonic glide vehicle, capable of performing precise maneuvers in mid-flight. Well, there you can see both of them.
Bueno, hay visibles las dos. En este otro video mucho más claro esto.
In this other video, it's much clearer. Even though it's Chinese music, this is the hypersonic missile successfully tested by the Chinese. And about the maneuverability of this missile, visible here in these images, yes, it helps me here. Now pay attention to this. These are the maneuvers, clearly visible in the first part of the glider vehicle. That's what they call the head of these missiles. It's a ballistic missile, and then during descent, at hypersonic speed, this glider vehicle can perform irregular maneuvers, so that no anti-missile, no interceptor missile, can determine its trajectory, and therefore, they appear to be uninterceptable, in addition to their hypersonic speed, by the way.
Además de su velocidad hipersónica, por cierto.
The first ones to have it were the Russians, and what you're pointing out is the capacity for random maneuvering, which means it's obviously unpredictable, because it's random, not pre-programmed. That randomness leads them to make those kinds of stochastic movements. And in the end, what they do recover in the final stage is a fixed trajectory, but you don't know where they're going to go.
There you can clearly see the sequences, or the completely arbitrary and irregular sequence. Although maybe, even, this is already too far-fetched. They somehow generated, perhaps by chance, the silhouette in the air of a fifth-generation fighter jet, right? I kind of remember.
Yes, I remember a little, yes.
A bit of flexibility in the interpretation, but the important thing, all those flips and then distances of 2,000 kilometers at 6,000 kilometers per hour, Mach 5. The other day, by the way, one of my mentions, no, ours, in one of our talks, Fernando, about the Mach 3 speed of the MiG-31. Someone in the comments replied, no, Mach 3 actually means 4,000 kilometers per hour. No, that's at surface level. Mach 3, at the altitude reached by the MiG-31, is roughly 3,000 kilometers per hour. This is due to a physical factor, depending on temperature and Mach speed. And that's why, well, a whole explanation. ChatGPT helped me with that, honestly. This missile goes at Mach 5, 6,000 kilometers per hour, but only covering 2,000 kilometers, when in fact, apparently, once fully developed, it could travel around the entire globe, all the way to the United States.
Yes, as I said, these are intercontinental missile warheads, so, well, many times, because the country can't handle that much. I mean, we're talking about ranges of 14,000 kilometers. So of course you limit it, and run tests at shorter distances. In Russia, which is the largest, they also limit it, because otherwise, I mean, the Russians with the Sarmat are supposedly around 20,000 kilometers. Among other things, what the Sarmat can do is circle around, do whatever they want, so that no one knows where they're coming from. I mean, it's not like before, when an attack between the United States and Russia involved intercontinental missiles that passed over the pole on ballistic trajectories. They went up beyond the atmosphere, re-entered, and fell on the other country. No, these can, let's say, come from anywhere and reach you from anywhere, and they don't have to go over the pole or any specific route. Basically, they can go any way, which makes them very unpredictable. But it's important to remember that none of this, as far as we know, and we would know somehow, is something the Americans have. That's where Trump's fear and pressure to rearm from a nuclear standpoint come from, because he knows that right now they're at a qualitative disadvantage.
Yes, but remember, Fernando, that according to Trump, these developments are the result of stolen American blueprints. It's a shame. It's the only copy.
It's a shame they didn't have more copies and that they ended up not being able to make them. Right? Anyway, these are the kinds of things that come with Trump.
That's why we always remind you, when you're at home writing a document, always create a backup, a safety copy, because otherwise the plans disappear. like in the case of the United States with the Chinese thieves, right?
Con los ladrones chinos, ¿no?
Claro, efectivamente, es así. Pero bueno.
Of course, that's exactly how it is. But well, these are things. Politics has degenerated so much that we've gotten used to constantly hearing nonsense, and it doesn't affect us anymore. Since it's constant, if they keep saying stupid things one after another, for days, weeks, years, there comes a point when you get used to it. You become immune, and you say, well, just another stupid comment. And since Trump is constantly saying stupid things, many times a day, there comes a point when you just say, well, another dumb thing from Trump, right? Whatever. One more, might as well go all in.
Efectivamente, querido Fernando. Bueno,
Indeed, dear Fernando. Well, today, 15 minutes later than usual, Santiago Martinez's program on DMP geopolitics begins, about the Soviet view of the Cold War. Next Wednesday, we'll have our talk as usual, but I'll be in Buenos Aires, in my homeland, back home for a few days. So I'm happy about the trip. I leave tomorrow. And Fernando, on Friday, by the way, Carmen Parejo Rendon's program starts on DMP geopolitics. She's a new analyst at DMP geopolitics. Quite a treat as well.
Parejo Rendón, nueva analista en DMP geopolítica, un lujazo también.
Así es.
That's right. I was going to say, look, just see how bad things already are in Europe. I didn't want to say this so as not to scare people, but look how bad things are. Ezequiel says, well, I'm going to Argentina. I'll see my family, whatever. And deep down he's saying, I'm leaving and not coming back because this only has a few days left. So this is a clear escape. And if Ezequiel is leaving the European continent, that's an unmistakable sign that this is over.
That is to say, no. Joking aside, our recommendation for everyone in Europe, Fernando, is to grab their passport and go.
Just let them go.
Well, anyway, if they can't, passport up to date, passport ready. Because in the event of a war with Russia, goodbye, folks. Everyone's leaving. No one's going to take part in a war in the name of Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, or Merz, for heaven's sake, right? If it were a just war, maybe. But in the name of these warmongers, no way. Dear Fernando, as always, a pleasure. To our moderator, Beatriz Pulido, a kiss and a hug, as always. To the demolishers, men and women, my thanks. And with that said, until next time, my dear friend.
Hasta la próxima, querido amigo.
Hasta luego, gracias.
See you later. Thank you.
Okay.